So, you ever stop and think about this? What gives a court the power to just strike down a law? A law that was passed by Congress. It's a massive check on power, and its origin story is, well, it's this incredible journey. It goes from a fiery courtroom speech all the way to a landmark Supreme Court decision. Okay, let's get into it.
And it all kicks off with this really powerful, kind of revolutionary idea, declared decades before the Constitution was even written. The guy behind it? A patriot named James Otis Jr. And that one sentence? That's the seed. The seed from which one of the most important principles in American law would grow.
So yeah, that's the big question we're tackling here. How did we get from Otis's really bold claim in some colonial courtroom to the established power of the Supreme Court today? It's a fantastic story of principle, politics, and honestly, a brilliant legal move. All right, to really get this, we've got to go back, way back, to the very beginning, to a tense Boston courtroom and the man who first lit the fuse, James Otis Jr. So the whole fight was over these things called writs of assistance. And you got to understand, these weren't your normal search warrants. Nope, they were basically blank checks for the government to just barge in. They let British officials search your home, your shop, your ship, anywhere, anytime, without having to give a single specific reason. So, picture this, 1761. Otis, who's this top-tier lawyer, stands up in court and basically takes on the entire British system. He wasn't just debating some legal technicality, he was making a much bigger point. He was arguing that these writs were a flat-out assault on the fundamental rights of every single colonist. And wow, the impact was immediate. A young lawyer named John Adams was sitting right there in the courtroom, and it totally changed him. Years later, he'd remember Otis as being a flame of fire. What a perfect way to describe it, right? The passion that lit up a revolutionary idea. The seed had officially been planted. So what was Otis really arguing? Well, at its heart, his argument was basically an appeal to a higher law. He was saying, look, call it a constitution, call it natural rights, whatever. There are some fundamental lines that a government just cannot cross. And if a law crosses that line, it isn't really a law at all. It's void.
All right, let's jump forward a few decades. That idea Otis fought for, once a radical cry in a colonial courtroom, is now about to face its biggest test yet. And this time, it's in the highest court of a brand new nation.
The whole scene is set for this massive political showdown. You've got President John Adams on his way out the door, appointing a whole slate of judges at the very last minute. People called him the Midnight Judges. But then his rival, Thomas Jefferson, takes over. He is not happy about it. And he tells his Secretary of State, James Madison, don't you dare deliver those official papers. Well, one of the guys who didn't get his job, William Marbury, decides to sue. And this put the new Chief Justice, John Marshall, in a really tough spot. I mean, a total lose-lose situation. If he orders President Jefferson to hand over the job, Jefferson's just going to laugh and ignore him, making the court look totally powerless. But if he does nothing, it looks like the court is just caving to political pressure. He was stuck.
Or was he? Because what Marshall does next is it's a work of art, a political masterstroke. He figures out a way to sidestep a direct fight with the president, and in the process, he grabs a much bigger, much more permanent power for the court, a power that would define its role from that day forward.
And there it is. Do you hear that? It's the echo of James Otis, but this time it's not just a lawyer in a courtroom. This is coming from the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. In the 1803 case of Marbury v. Madison, Marshall declared that any law that goes against the Constitution is, simply, void. It cannot stand.
I mean, the connection is crystal clear, right? Marshall basically took that philosophical fire from James Otis and forged it into the legal bedrock of the American system. The radical idea from 1761 had finally, officially become the law of the land.
And that, right there, is what we call judicial review. You know, today it seems so obvious, but you have to remember, back then, this was a huge deal. The courts were mostly seen as the weakest branch of government. By claiming this power, the Supreme Court was basically saying, we are the ultimate referees of the Constitution, putting itself on equal footing with Congress and the President for the very first time.
Okay, so why is this so important? Why does it matter so much? Let's really break down the thinking behind Marshall's move and see why it has such a lasting legacy. You know, the logic Marshall used is actually, well, it's beautifully simple when you lay it out. 1. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, period. 2. So if Congress passes a regular law that clashes with the supreme law, the regular law has to lose. It's invalid.
And 3, it's the whole job of the courts to interpret the law, so it has to be their job to make this call. It's just a powerful, straightforward argument.
And this is such a critical job. Think of judicial review like the guardrails on a highway. It's there to protect our liberty from government overreach. It makes sure that nobody is above the law, and it puts the Constitution itself at the very top, above Congress, above the president, and yeah, even above the courts.
So in the end, the establishment of this principle wasn't really seen as some kind of judicial power grab. Instead, as the source material frames it, it was the fulfillment of a core American idea, that ours is a government of laws, not of people. It was brilliant, really. Marshall let the Jefferson administration win the small battle. Marbury never got his job. But in doing so, he secured for the court the ultimate power to say what the law is.
And that really leaves us with this huge question, doesn't it? We all agree the Constitution is the supreme law, but the power to say what that document actually means? Well, that is a profound power in itself. It's a question that started with James Otis in that courtroom, and it's one we are still debating to this very day.